If you like what we do here on Skiba News Nation, please like and subscribe, and also share with others so that we can grow the biggest truth-seeking community on the internet. Huge shout out to all of our Patreon supporters. We couldn't do this show without you, so I just wanted to say thank you. And if you want to help support us, go to patreon.com/Skiba News Nation.
What it costs. I want to know what the truth is. And I hope that people, my son, anybody, if my name comes up, whether you like me, whether you agree with me or not, at least you can respect the fact that he's on a quest for truth. He's on a quest for truth.
Welcome to Skiba News Nation, bringing you unfiltered views, news, interviews, discussions, and more. And now, here's your host, Jeremiah Skiba, award-winning musician and son of Rob Skiba.
Hey Skiba News Nation family, today we are excited because we have a very special guest, Gary Wayne. He's an author, researcher known for his work on ancient history, biblical mysteries, and uncovering hidden truths. Gary, we're so excited to have you on our show. Welcome to Skiba News Nation.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and so happy to be here and really looking forward to working with you guys and talking to your audience about topics that I know I love to talk about and probably they can't get enough information on. So
right on. Yeah, I wanted to ask you because you knew my dad, Rob Skiba. Can you tell me how you formed your relationship with my dad?
Yeah, it was kind of twofold. One was he had gotten a hold of me obviously through some of the things I might have been posting on Facebook or whatever, and invited me on his radio show. I think it was on Wednesday nights and Thursday nights. So the first series we did was, back to back. And I was a newcomer to the genre, and he was a very, very well established person and very, very respectful and congenial when I went on. It was just, I just felt so comfortable, and it was a good relationship right out of the gate. And as it turned out, he was also connected with the Now You See TV people, with the two Johns over there. And so I worked with him at a convention that Now You See TV put on in Indiana. And so worked with him on shows, worked with him in a few conventions, and got to know him, and just can't speak more highly of the individual. He's missed for sure, and his research has helped so many people, and that's what we're here to do. So try and bring information and new information to people, and then let people decide how that fits with what they believe.
Awesome. Yeah, Jake was telling me before we started filming that you have so much insight on so many different things, and if I had any questions that you'd be the perfect person to ask. So
well, thank you, Jake.
Do you have a breakdown on Donald Trump's bloodline? I'm just curious.
I did a little bit of work on it, but it is so far down on the bloodline trail that I'm sure it's obviously he's been part of the nobility. It looks like it might be a little bit of new money, might be a little bit of old money, but he would be very much what I would classify as a pseudo bloodline. So not considered a part of the pure extension of the bloodlines, not even necessarily part of what they call the stable of agents of the other pseudo blue bloods in North America. That would be like the Morgans, that would be like the Carnegie, that would be like the Rockefellers and the DuPonts, and a lot of the ones that get associated with the 13 families. Well, they're not there yet. They've been able to intermarry some of them because of the sponsorship by the Rothschilds early on, and then they've been intermarrying into European bloodlines. So they are vassals, they are stable agents, and that's why the U.S. is used as an attack dog for the European bloodlines and their vision of the New World Order and how they want to control the world. He's not really sort of considered, well, he's actually anti the European establishment. It's not that he's against what they want. He just wants a different role. So he wants a larger role in that new world order. So I like a lot of things that Trump does, but unfortunately, he still is working in a direction that is trying to bring about that global government. And so it's a slower pace and it's a different look. But you could look at President Xi or President Putin of Russia and China as having almost a similar type of position. They're not against the New World Order. They want a larger role, and they don't want to be dominated by the Europeans, and they don't particularly like the organizational structure that the Europeans envision implanting on the world in this New World Order. So there's lots of things going on, and it's going to continue for a bit.
Awesome. Yeah, I heard you mention so many like older names like the Rothschilds and Carnegie, and I don't know why the name that popped in my head because I've been thinking about doing a history story on it. But P.T. Barnum, can you tell me anything about P.T. Barnum?
Yeah, I mean he's obviously comes out of the nobility class or the elite class, and again he was sort of standing against the status quo of the standard elite. But I would look at him just sort of fitting in better with the group than what Trump does. From an adversarial or non-adversarial, he would be probably the dark hat versus the white hat in their allegory. And it's not that white hats have good intentions for humankind. They have a different approach, a different tactic, and they are of the same pantheon beliefs. So they may on the short term help humans, but on the longer term they have the same agenda and they have the same gods that they worship. So I would put PT in there, and with the circus aspect, and you bring in a lot of different other belief systems through that circus act. You have the clown aspect, you have the gypsies, you have all sorts of other things that are sort of in the darker side or the black magic side of polytheism. So I would say he probably comes from there. Again, absolutely sort of revolutionized entertainment, but that's not unusual for people of either the white or the dark side of polytheism, but not significant bloodlines again.
When you bring up the two topics of Donald Trump's bloodline and his kind of representing the white hat, and then you bring up P.T. Barnum and the kind of the black side of the whole equation, I think it's so amazing, Jeremiah, that you set up the interview starting out like this, because Gary, I'm really interested if you could walk us through the concept of the Hegelian dialectic and how there's these opposing forces set up throughout history to kind of prop up the equation that allows them to control the world. And maybe you could break down how you have throughout history these white hats and black hats and people who fill these roles to create the equation of the Hegelian dialectic, which is the creating a problem and then offering the solution for that problem. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, and both before and after the flood. So they have the same structure set up after the flood as they did before the flood. And it sort of underlines in Ecclesiastes 1 where there's nothing new under the sun, what was will be again. And as you move on to that passage, it talks about the understanding of this only brings grief and sorrow. So lay that down for what we're going to talk about on how the transgenerational nature of this structure has been with us ever since the creation of the Adamites. So it's important to understand it. So they have two major belief systems within their belief system. There's a macro dualism and there's a micro dualism, and those are my terms and not their terms, but just in my own mind I like to be able to segregate it. So in their mind, in that dualism on the macro level, Satan is the equal of God, and God would be just another archon or angel, or one of the 12 archons that Sophia created through this nebulous male life force. and Satan would also be one of them, but and is competing with the God of the Bible in their belief system. So you might imagine for both the dualism that I'll get into next as well, a chessboard where you have black and white, right? And they continue to play the game. And in a lot of the imagery of polytheism, we'll have Satan sitting on one side of the chessboard and God supposedly on the other side. And this war never ends. You might lose one game, but the next game you might win the next game, and it goes back and forth throughout the history. So that's the macro that they look at, and why they believe they can win their own realm as long as they keep fighting, because that they are equals and nobody ever wins this war. Now, within polytheist religions, they have white magic and black magic. They have good giants and evil giants. They have good witches and evil witches. And we need to understand wizards and witches and magicians as being the priest class and the priestess class. And so on each side of the white hats and the black hats, as it's been set up, they're going to have their own set of leaders and priests, kings, and governments, and they're all rivals as well, which sort of goes into the mix. And they're all rivals because they all want to be that dynastic bloodline that's going to run the world. So when we look at the inner level and the visible level, we would understand them as the visible representatives of the invisible ones. They are the spurious offspring of the fallen angels, the demigods as they're understood in antiquity, and giants as they're understood in antiquity, and Nephilim and Rephaim as they're noted as two of the names for giants in the Bible. And that they are working the agenda of the invisible ones, the visible ones. And so you have on a chessboard white and black. So that goes on earth as it is in heaven in their belief system. And so they receive their power from their heaven, from Hades, Sheol, Argatha, and when all the different names they have for their place where they believe their gods dwell all around the world. And they receive their authority through those gods as well, and the divine right to rule. And so that's the system that they have set up. And that as we see that sort of play out in modern politics, that's where that uniparty thing sort of comes from, that concept, or a rhino. It's all sort of an extension of that. It's just not clearly sort of defined for people. And so anybody who stands up against that directional system that wants to end up in the same place, even though they have two different tactics in terms of how to get there, they're going to get crushed if they're not following or playing ball, or they're going to be at least tried to be crushed or eliminated or canceled, whatever words that you want to use on that. So how that works is look at two poles, polar opposites, and they're working from both ends to cattle herd people in one direction. And so their essential core policies are nuanced differently, but not essentially different. So if we look at that today, you have that perpetual war gene that's in effect. That if you want to look at the Republicans as the establishment party, they have that perpetual war gene, and they have globalism as part of that as well, and several other policies that are identical to what the establishment of the left would be. And there would be a few differences as you get a bit further left and a little bit different right, but they become sort of nuances and sort of smaller pieces to their policies and things like that. So they're moving things in the same direction, maybe at a different pace, maybe one that's better for Christians as it seems on the short term and not as painful, but nonetheless they're going to end up in the same place. And they've used that throughout history. So whether or not you look at how history is written, it's always good guys and bad guys, right? Fairy tales are good guys and bad guys. And this is their belief system. And that they receive this, I think this war gene, allegorically speaking, because I don't believe there's actually a war gene, but it seems to be part of their DNA. I think they received this from their celestial mafia godfathers, and that they were created to ensure humankind did not reach their destiny. which is to be raised up like angels and to be inheritors of eternity. And so they do what the fallen angels don't do. The fallen angels know the power of God, and they do not like to get blood on their hands because they know what God could do to them. So they created the offspring to do all of that for them. So when you see people slandering God, you're likely not going to see a fallen angel do that, but they'll have their offspring do it and their followers do it. And so everything that they do in the religion is designed to slander God, degrade God, and to lead people away from God. And as well as the fourth piece of what they do in their religion is to honor their own pantheon of gods.
Now, you mentioned fallen angel. Have you done any research on like Mothman? I'm just curious.
Not on Mothman. It's I know of Mothman, and it certainly is popular in the occult. And so Mothman really sort of brings in, from the description and understanding, an interesting mix, right? So it's not just possibly a fallen angel and human mix, but you have a third piece that sort of goes into it, or maybe more. So it seems to be more akin to the chimera aspect as it comes out of Greek mythology. So, what's an example of a chimera in history or mythology, as people might understand it, would be the Epic of Gilgamesh, where you have King Hababa is a chimera king of the cedar forest, who's called the Terrible One, and is given the authority by the gods to do terrible things to the humans. And he lives in the cedar forest. Most likely is at Mount Hermon. And he has multiple aspects of different animals to him. So something more is going on versus Gilgamesh or Enkidu, which are created after the flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And so different than the Gilgamesh that's in the Enoch Book of Giants, that's before the flood, likely named after him and maybe even inherits his mythos. But he's the son of Lugalbanda, king of Uruk, and Nin, the fertility goddess, and is created in the 6th generation after the flood. So when we look at how they describe him, it's kind of interesting, because typically when you look at offspring of the gods and humans in polytheism, or fallen angels and humans in the Bible, they're kind of like half God. They're a demigod, 50% God, 50% human. But these giants in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and all the giants who survive on the Ark in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Upnapishtim, and all of his family, they're archetypical giants. But they're described differently. They are 2/3 God and 1/3 human. So whether or not that's just sort of an allegorical variation, or it has some sort of actual physical aspects, it starts to let you peer into the idea that there's an ability to weight that concentration of what a demigod is, and to have different sort of aspects. And Gilgamesh is larger than the giants in the Covenant Land. He is both in the Ugaritic text, which comes out of the Covenant Land. He is 11 cubits tall and 4 cubits wide, while as a royal cubit, that's 19 feet tall. And Og's bed is only 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. So he would be less than 7 feet wide. Og would be maybe 4, 5, 6 feet wide, and he could be 12 to 15 feet to fit into the iron bed. But Gilgamesh, in not only the Ugaritic text, but all the other accounts, is described with the same dimensions. So he's 7 feet wide and 19 feet tall. And he's a dark-haired giant versus the other colors of hair that are typically recorded in the Covenant Land and elsewhere around the world. So there might be, again, something else that's going on there, but it's that understanding of the chimera effect. And as we roll that forward as being like the days of Noah, we're seeing that technology of DNA manipulation that is called the chimera sciences, basically. And so we're trying to duplicate that same kind of knowledge. So I think you can make a case that if Mothman is real, it is a different type of angelic creation with some sort of DNA manipulation, and probably lower on the scale of the visible ones, but probably higher than the elementals.
Right on.
Does that make some sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, what about Bigfoot? Do you think there's
Similar
a
sort of
Nephilim
similar
line?
sort of thing. Yeah, similar sort of thing to that. So, Mothman has a legacy that's older than North American and our current age, and Bigfoot goes back throughout our history as well, as do elementals, and also before the flood. But it's not a giant, it's hairy, and even though the Horim would be described as quite cave dwellers and hairy in its definition, they'd be a lot larger than these, and a different kind of being than the Bigfoot. Bigfoot have shining eyes, which is again akin to the shining ones of the giant. So there's a relationship here. They seem to be connected to the elementals, giants, and caves. All three are in interdimensional travel. So seemingly, from the occult perspective, something there as well. So, but again, you have this ape-like feature or bear-like feature that is coming in, and it's almost again like that chimera type of thing. So we don't know what all the different angels in the hierarchies look like. I mean, we know what a seraphim looks like as a serpent face. We know the four faces of a cherubim, but we don't know what, an excusia or a dunamis or an Icarus or all the other different angels in the hierarchy, what they would look like with their faces. We're just not provided that. We know archangels have a human face. At least, and angels seemingly have a human face. And the understanding that if they can take a physical form, which they can, to reproduce in the physical world, that trait would pass on. So when we look at, and just to make a sort of a set the table and a case for how Bigfoot might come about, based on speculation, of course, because we don't have this biblically, is that when you look at the ancient pantheon of the gods and their offspring, the kings, they were mostly depicted as serpents in the governing class. But there are different other kinds of gods, and we also get references to different kinds of mighty men or giants or warriors. And so we get, for example, the lion men of Moab, or the lion-like men of Gad, or Arioch, which means lion-like, as one of the four giant kings coming out of Mesopotamia. So we have a god listed in the Bible named Nergal that the Avim worshipped in the Mesopotamian region. Avim were also in the Covenant land. And that's Nergal. And Nergal is a lion-headed god. And a lion head shows up on a cherubim, and typically when we have a cherubim take a physical form, it's going to use one of those heads. So you can imagine a sphinx as a lion head or a human head, but also cherubs also have, as they're described in the Middle East, in Assyria, in the Mesopotamia, they would be bull's heads and birds' heads, or gargoyle type heads. And again, all different individual faces of the cherubim. Now, if you look on a relief of the Anunnaki, which are watcher gods and are depicted with these wings, and they're quite stocky characters, and they do this ritual around this electronic tree, or some sort of technology. Some people call it a tree of life of some sort. Don't know what it is, but it's certainly something they're doing a ritual around. You get two different depictions of that. One is with a human head, dark-haired, and a big beard, similar to how Nimrod or Gilgamesh would be depicted. And you also have one with a bird's head. It seemed to be, this seems to be a image of a walking with a human body type form of a cherubim. And again, when you look at like the Urmulu, which lion creatures are created from the gods as well, and they have a human head with a lion's body. You also have lion-headed Nergal with a human body as well. Sometimes they're depicted with a serpentine body, but they're still from the Watcher class. So I think when you take a physical form, and you're taking that physical form that represents what your face would be as a spiritual being in the physical world, then you would pass on those traits. So that's why you would have the original giants that were referred to as serpents, or the kings as serpents. And I cover that off in detail in book 1, and then a little bit more in book 2. So how does that relate to the fallen angels? We don't know what those other faces are. So if they also produced, whether before or after the flood or both, then you could imagine that you could have these creatures that are a little bit different within the hierarchy. So you do get in Indian mythology and Chinese mythology and religious writings of monkey face gods and ape face gods. But there's a very interesting passage in a book that's a Gnostic book called Pistis Sophia in chapter 4, chapter 126, and what it's depicting are these antediluvian watcher angels that are in the pit prison, and it's describing what they look like. And one has a bull's face, for example, so probably from a cherubim. One has a cat or a lion's face, probably from a cherubim. You have serpent ones and crocodile ones, probably from the seraphim. But you also have a bare-faced one, and his name is Lucar. And you also have one that has a boar's face. So I don't know whether there's an angel that has a pig's face or not, but one deduces that if they had produced offspring, they would look like them. But it's that one with the bare face that I find a bit striking, and it fits with what we understand about the creation of the giants and how they originally looked before the flood, and then after the flood for a while before their bloodlines become diluted.
I think it's so interesting that you bring up the various types of the angelic kingdom, and I've often speculated how there could be an angel at the head of each of those respective like animal kingdoms. So you have like the possible arachnid representation before the throne of heaven. You have an angelic head of that whole line of creation, and just to think about the strange creatures that exist in the world, and the amazing wonders that are in the depths of the water. It's just fascinating to think about how many variety of because really, to me, an angel in a lot of ways represents the pinnacle of perhaps the created world. So you have angels over top of perhaps these various aspects of the animal kingdom, and those are the representatives of those creatures before the Most High. So I could imagine it working that way. We don't have a lot of textual proofs that break down how the hierarchy of those things work, but it's really interesting to think about.
Yeah, it is for sure. And typically we only get what the descriptions of the watchers look like, right? So we know what the Ophanim look like as they're depicted in the book of Ezekiel in the wheel. We know the cherubim, we know seraphim, and we know archangels, but we don't know what those other angels look like that are lower in those sort of pillars of angelic rank and order. So yeah, it's quite interesting. And also in the Bible, in one passage, in the same passage where you're going to get Nergal listed with the Avim, there's another god they worship there. It's called Nebaz. And that's defined as a barking god. And he was worshipped with a dog's head and a human's body. And all of a sudden now you start thinking about dogmen and dog Nephilim. And, we get jackal references to gods in the Bible, and we have this Nebaz, and one might deduce that might be a connection there. I don't know what rank that would be. But we do get like Anubis in the Egyptian pantheon as being a jackal god. And in that mythology, he produces prolifically, so much so he creates a city for his dog warriors and dog Nephilim, I guess it would be the more accurate way of calling them. And it was called Sinoopolis by the Greeks. That means dog city. And Cynocephalus is the word for the dog mythos, with Sino basically coming from, a dog etymological root out of Greek. So we have dogmen recorded in China. We have them in Southeast Asia. We have them in India. We have them in North Africa. We have them in Egypt. There's many places they were recorded. And again, we don't have an adequate explanation for that. Again, it could be all polytheist, additions to history, but anytime I see a barking god like Nebaz mentioned in the Bible, I start to think, I don't have any more information on that, but now you have a basis to understand that from what information we've been provided.
So, do you have any candidates for the Antichrist?
Oh, there's a lot. So yeah, it's good to talk about. I know the first thing I will qualify is that what we don't want to do, in my opinion, and what I encourage people not to do, is just to point at people and say he's absolutely the Antichrist. And it's been done, unfortunately, with all of the presidents. And I'm not saying some of those presidents weren't bad people. I'm just saying they just weren't going to be the Antichrist. And how you could ever make that case for it was, certainly didn't stand the test of time. So we want to be careful. I think it's going to have a pedigree. And I think there's many rivals. And Jesus said there would be multiple antichrists, and in the epistles of John we're told there's multiple antichrists. So we're going to see many, but there's only one sort of antichristos, mixing Greek and Hebrew together there, but the Antichrist. And Antichrist is going to require a plausible Antichrist to defeat, just as he's going to require a plausible Armageddon war that he takes credit for working. And so when we look at who in this world seem to have Antichrist contentions, again, that's the royales, that's the elites. And I like those two words, elites. If you break that word into two, you have El and ites. And and typically it would be, if they're going to do it accurately, but I think they're taking sort of the lead out of how a lot of the peoples are translated in the Bible as ites. I would take that to be as Elim, as in Nephilim or Gibberim or Rephaim. And El is this, as it's sort of defined as this superior group of people that run the world for us. And that El is the Hebrew word for an angel or a god. And the royale is the kings of God, as you take that back in its etymology. And again, El is transliterated as Aal, as in Baal, meaning Lord God in one of its translations. And so Il is another translation in a different language. ILU is also used. So I look more for those who believe they are the descendants of the giants, who want to bring their dragon messiah, their house of dragons, so to speak, onto the world throne. And they have many rivals, and they all keep their genealogies back to a specific Nephilim and or Rephaim patriarch, and to a specific celestial Mafia godfather, one of the fallen angels, or the Nephilim of the Shemaim. And I think they are the likely proponents to try and bring about the Antichrist, and I would give them odds-on favorite to producing the Antichrist as well. But I don't think it has to be, but I think it's likely to be from a bloodline. So if I was looking at the European bloodlines and the purebloods that have been positioning themselves for the last 2,000 years in Europe, I would look at royales like the Anjou. And the Anjou have three major branches. and currently hold the King of Jerusalem title by Philippe Bourbon, who were inherited from the Habsburg Lorraine dynasty, who inherited that from the Lorraine kings that produced the founders of the Knights Templar and Anjou bloodlines and descendants of the last survivor of the Merovingians named Dagobert. Those three founders would be de Bouillon, de Payan, and Anjou, who were part of the Lorraine Anjou. And the Merovingian bloodlines have Benjamite bloodlines, as they say, they have that are grafted in through a couple avenues. They have Davidic bloodlines grafted in, and I think blasphemously wise, they say they have bloodlines of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And they have this Quinatar bloodline that goes back to a Baphomet character, Baphomet being Father Mitra or Mithra of Zoroastrianism, the religion of the giants, and or Mithraism, which is a branch religion, which was the religion of the Roman army. And so they have all of these pedigrees that they have in place, and they crown themselves the kings of Jerusalem in 1118 in a small priory on the rock of Sion, and that they have rights to Jerusalem based on those bloodlines that Joshua provided the Benjamites in the time of the Exodus. He awarded them the city of Jerusalem. No, Benjamites didn't take Jerusalem. That didn't happen until over 400 years later when David took it. But nonetheless, it's a Benjamite city. And King Saul would be that bloodline that's grafted in, according to the Sicambrian Franks and or Mary Magdalene, as they would say Mary Magdalene is of the Benjamite bloodline. So they claimed that King of Jerusalem title and held that King of Jerusalem title, and it's been passed on. Now there's two rivals. The von Habsburg still make a claim to that, and the Savoy, which is the Italian nobility, are Anjou as well. So those are the three bloodlines that make claim to the King of Jerusalem title from the Anjou perspective. But you also have other bloodlines we need to be considering. So you have to consider the Windsor bloodline, which is the Hanover bloodline, and has many other ones grafted in, like with the Stuarts. And also have a seat at the table at the Royal Masonic Order of the Royal Order of the Golden Fleece, which was the material the gods would make their clothes out of, so that those bodies in the physical world would last longer, so they wouldn't have to continually, reproduce new bodies. And so Queen Elizabeth had a chair there, so King Charles III, as he is today, would likely have a chair there as well. And I think those are two very important bloodlines. And I think you have other royal bloodlines around Europe as well, and the Stuarts still have survivors that would make a claim. And I think you have the Hanoverian and Middle Europa claims of royalty. So you have all of these bloodlines, and if you go back to World War I, whether or not it's the Romanovs, which is a junior offshoot of the Putyanin bloodline out of Kiev of Tsars, or it is the Kaisers, as in Kaiser Wilhelm in Germany at that time, whether it's the Habsburgs, the Bourbon family, the Anjou, the Windsors, they were all cousins at that time. So it was a family war that was being fought in World War I. World War II was just an extension of World War I, essentially the same war, just separated with a pause. So you have those bloodlines who are rivals, and they've been rivals all along. And you had, with World War I, you had the Western bloodlines who had created social masonry before through their Masonic societies. They deployed that with communism to take care of a more pure bloodline that goes back to the Putyanin bloodline of the Rurika dynasties out of Kiev. And they basically wiped off the junior offshoot of that bloodline. And so they did that again in China with the Xia dynasty, XIA, pronounced Xia, that produced all of the dragon kings from the dragon creator gods from both before and after the flood in Chinese history. and that communism took care of another bloodline that the Western bloodlines took care of. But we have a Xi from the Western Shah bloodline on the throne today who has dynastic implications. And whether or not you can take Putin at face value or not, he believes he's a descendant from the Putyanin bloodline through his grandfather or great-grandfather, whose name comes out of nowhere in about 1850 as an out-of-wedlock child who would receive, in their tradition, some wealth, but not any claims to the dynasty, and not the whole name. And so that's where the name Putin comes from, which is, interestingly enough, part of the Putyanin name. And his father moves to St. Petersburg in about World War I, which is how he ends up there. So he has dynastic claims. He wants to, in particular, as he talked about with Tucker, he says he's just trying to recreate the Romanov dynasty, which is the Putyanin dynasty, and Kiev is the holy city. I think we're going to have rivals all around the world. And you have an interesting battle that's just before the midpoint of the last 7 years, as I would put it from a timetable perspective, in the Gog War, which is in the last days and before the second Exodus, which Ezekiel 39 talks about, which is in the last 3.5 years. And you have Gog of Magog, chief prince of Gog. Well, Gog doesn't come out of anywhere in the Bible in terms of where that name would come from, but it is defined as an Antichrist figure in the end time. And Gog, in polytheism, was a giant both before and after the flood. And giants, again, were named after giants before the flood, as was Magog, a giant before the flood, and Elbion. Those three were created originally by Iapetus, a Greek god of the sea before the flood, a parent god versus offspring god after the flood. And you have this giant name of Gog that shows up in Ezekiel 38 and 39, and also in Revelation 20 for another war. And we do get Magog, which comes out of the Table of Nations in Genesis 10 and First Chronicles. And we don't know whether that was his original name or not, or was changed because they moved the descendants of Japheth moved amongst the Scythian giants, or it was his actual name. I'll leave that for other people to decide how they believe that name ends up there. But Gog of Magog is the chief prince of Meshech. Now here's the connection to Putin. Meshech is the etymological root for the city of Moscow. And so all of a sudden now you might have an Antichrist figure with the bloodline that they felt was, by the Western European bloodlines, more pure and not cooperating with the Western European agenda that they tried to wipe out. That might be the actual Antichrist figure that a European bloodline might take credit for as defeating to fulfill his false Messianic pedigree. So I think there's going to be bloodlines that show up all around the world from different regions, and they're all going to be competing as well. So we have, for example, the Mahdis out of the Middle East. You have a Mahdi in the Sunni religion, you have a Mahdi in the Shia religion, and they're, in their belief system, going to have this war and one wins. And so that will unite sort of Islam. And you also have a term called Lord Maitreya, which is an Antichrist allegorical term for Mithra coming back to incarnate into a human that ends an age and starts a new age. And Lord Maitreya is an Indo-Aryan word coming out of Zoroastrianism and the Zoroastrian religion for Mithra. And it also means a covenant, which is interesting as well. All reasons why they would probably pick that as the allegorical name. And that, Lord Maitreya is essentially connected to Baphomet, which is a goat-headed god that the Templars worship. And that means Father Mithra that the Templars were worshiping. And part of those degraded seraphim watchers, as I would look at them, or degraded watchers in particular, that would be depicted as a satyr god or a goat god. And just as Azazel is the Hebrew word in Leviticus 16 for the second goat that's sacrificed without explanation on the Day of Atonement, I think for the sins of the antediluvian world, because Azazel was the destroyer god of the antediluvian world. So it's sort of a long story. I think we're going to have lots of Antichrist figures. There's going to be wannabes, and then there's going to be legitimate contenders. And even though we probably will be able to identify him with being involved with the negotiating of the covenant of death in Daniel 9:27, we still want to be careful because he's not actually becoming Antichrist. That begins his rise for the first 3.5 years of the last 7, but he's actually crowned as he's described in 2 Thessalonians and in Revelation, which is the time of the abomination at that time. And that's when we can clearly identify him. Although I think unless there's multiple people that are taking credit for that's creating the covenant and spreading out the actual sort of infamy of the one that is the key player there, we'll be able to identify him at the beginning, but he's not. We have to keep in mind he's still not Antichrist, and Babylon still is in control.
I love so much how you describe it as a multi-headed beast almost. You describe the warring bloodlines as all putting forth their valid candidate to fulfill this role of this prophetic figure of the one who will rule the world, the New World Order. And I think it's so beautiful because the way you describe the competing bloodlines of who's to become Antichrist really does parallel the vision that John has in the book of Revelation with the multi-headed beast and the Antichrist representative coming from one of the heads of the beast. And it's just a really interesting concept. And I had a question. It's kind of a multi-layered question, so if you'll bear with me as I walk you through kind of what I'm asking here. But it's in relation to the topic of the Antichrist. And I know Rob used to love to talk about how the Tower of Babel and Nimrod, the figure, had so many parallels to the Antichrist that's prophesied, just in terms of this rippling wave of biblical prophecy that seems to repeat itself throughout history, which is why we have so many examples of Antichrist-like figures, even way back in the past, such as Pharaoh and King Herod, and these figures who kill the firstborn child, and these figures who come and try to impose their authority over the Most High's people. We have Pharaoh and the 10 plagues of Egypt, and the parallels there with the 10 plagues of Egypt and the judgments in the book of Revelation with the trumpets and the seals. But here's the question. It's in relation to the Antichrist, and Isaiah 46:10 is a well-known verse, and it says this. It says, "I make known the end from the beginning, and from ancient times what's still to come. I say my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please." And so there's this biblical premise that there are secrets to be revealed in ancient times as we see a pattern manifest in reality that we are in today. And so there's some interesting Hebrew linguistic characteristics and some of the poetry called chiastic structures. And for our viewers and listeners who aren't familiar, chiastic structures are where the beginning is also the end, and it kind of has a palindrome-like appearance where it's kind of like a mirrored image, so to speak. And you see it in the way that the Hebrews wrote some of their psalms and various aspects. And so I'm kind of applying this idea, Gary, of a chiastic structure or like a palindrome to this premise of we'll know the end from the beginning. And so if this premise is plausible, if it can be looked at as a mirrored image, we have the words of Christ himself, right? That the coming of the Son of Man will be likened to the days of Noah. But if we're approaching that time period from a mirrored image, what event precedes, in a chiastic structure and a palindrome image, right? What precedes the days of Noah? Well, in the scriptural account, it would be whatever directly followed it in kind of our biblical narrative, right? So what comes after the flood in the narrative is the Tower of Babel. It's the sin of Nimrod and the scattering of the people and the languages. So it's almost if you know how we had cassette tapes back in the day, and you'd put them in your VCR and it'd say "Be kind, rewind." Uh, it's almost as if we're rewinding time, and prophetically things are playing out in this kind of rewinded fashion, leading up until the Antichrist and then the days of Noah, as the Messiah talked about. So, is there anything that do you have any thoughts on this concept, and are there any direct prophetic parallels you see with the days of the Tower of Babel and Nimrod and today's world, the one world government, the one world language, the one world currency? What are your thoughts? Because this goes hand in hand with some of Rob's research.
Yeah, it's such a terrific question and principle that I think is very helpful to understand where we came from, where we are today, and where we're going. So, and it fits well in with the days of Noah allegory. Nothing is new under the sun. And we also get a passage in 2 Peter 3, that's talking about, in the beginning with the destruction of fire, and that this is a destruction that's reserved for the end time again. So all of that is to help us sort of understand this cycle that happens, that the spurious offspring and the fallen angels that produce the spurious offspring both have been at war with God, and both have been trying to ensure humankind that we do not reach our destiny, with the spurious offspring doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So if we start to understand that, then I think we need to look at, from a flood perspective, what's going on with the flood and maybe why the flood comes. Maybe the flood is permitted, or God brings the flood, keeping in mind polytheists say that the gods brought the flood. However it happens, as you mentioned, God is Alpha Omega. He knows the beginning of the end no matter what. He knows all the decisions and things that are going to play out right from before creation. And that I think maybe the flood might have been brought so that there wasn't that destruction by fire, which is reserved for the end time. And that when you look at the days of Noah allegory in the book of Luke, it not only has the days of Noah, but the days of Sodom and Gomorrah that's destroyed by fire. So it's like a linkage to that destruction as well. And by inference and passages that go together with 2 Peter 3 and the days of Noah, is that the crimes at Sodom would be the same as the crimes before the flood. And I think that's when I say other passages like Jude 1, for example. So without getting too far down that trail on the minutia, let's look at what probably happened before the flood. Well, you have sort of a concept that we need to understand, that if the Antichrist is coming, and the Antichrist spirit has been with us for a very long period of time, as we're told in the New Testament, and that this is like a beast spirit, these allegories start to come together from an Old Testament perspective, and that we should understand that perhaps that destruction by water, which may have prevented the technology level that may have been before the flood, which we're just catching up to today, that has the ability to destroy the earth by fire, may have been in play with all of the violence and the wars of the giants. And if that's the case, then one deduces there would be an Antichrist figure before the flood, even though we're not provided that scripture or text in the Bible. Just to be clear, I'm speculating here with the cycle aspect. And that in polytheism we get accounts of Antichrist type figures like Zudra in the Indian religion, or you have subcontinent of India, or you would have Orion in the Greek mythology, the Orion the hunter, and another one, and it may be the same individual, might be Atlas, who was the king of Atlantis with the 10 kings that was trying to take over the whole world to implement the Atlantean religion that I believe is Enochian mysticism from Son of Cain, that dominated the antediluvian world, and they were going to impose that, and it didn't happen, and the flood came. But again, it's because the Antichrist, as in the Antichrist, is reserved for a specific ordained period of time. So it's plausible there would have been an Antichrist type figure, and the same crimes that happened before the flood would likely again happen after the flood, and somehow, some way, depending on how you want to get there, survival DNA, another arc as in survival, I guess, as well, or a recreation or a combination of the above. We have giants recorded after the flood, and we also have the Babel incident 101 years after the flood. And you have the offspring gods that are recorded, whether it's in the Sumerian text or the Greek text or the Ugaritic text, which is a really good one to look at in parallel with the language of Semitic, original Semitic to Hebrew, which is a Semitic language. You can take words back like Rephaim or Gibberim and Herman and those other words all back to the Semitic that's used in the Ugaritic text. And it describes Baal, offspring god of the parent god El, who ruled before the flood, and along with Anat and other gods of the Baalim council, created giants after the flood for a short period of time, and then they disappear. Probably went to the pit prison for the same crimes that their parent gods did before the flood. So somehow these giants show up. Somehow we get an implication that at a very short period after the flood, something strange has really gone on, because at the Babel incident, you're going to have God disperse all the people from Babel, even though they were supposed to do that right as soon as they left the mountain. And that he did that so that they couldn't remain as one people and acting as one people with one language, with some sort of knowledge that they seemingly have there, and by implication the knowledge to build the city and the tower that was used, that anything they decide they're going to do isn't going to be permitted from not doing. And thus the confusion of the languages and another intercession. Now Nimrod has complete control over all of the Noahites and imposes a mystical Babel religion, which is the Hebrew word for Babylon as it's used in the Greek in the New Testament. And so it seems to be the same religion that was used before the flood. And according from a Gnostic perspective, from a secret society perspective, Hermes finds the knowledge about all of the technology and the religion they had, and he takes it to Nimrod, and he becomes the first Grand Master of Masonry after the flood. And they build Babel City and Babel Tower. So you have an Antichrist archetype figure there with Nimrod, about 100 years after the flood, because Babel happens at the dispersion about 101 years, according to the genealogies. So you have this cycle that seems to be repeating. And then you have the beast empires that I like to make the case for in book 2, and I begin in book 1 on it, is that these are the empires and the bloodlines of the giants, and best implicated by the giant that's a Megastrani giant type giant that's in Daniel 2, that's going to show gold to iron and clay in terms of the allegories of the 7 empires, or of the 5 empires that are listed there. And that bloodline is kind of being diluted from gold to silver to bronze to iron and clay. So one aspect of the degradation, there could be several layers of that allegory, but to give an idea and a connection that these are lower level bloodlines or descendants as they come down through history. So when we look at the beast empires, they have Antichrist wannabes. They have Alexander, they have Nebuchadnezzar, they have Sargon, they have all of these different ones that could be an Antichrist wannabe having control over most of the civilization that Michael is fighting against. He doesn't fight against necessarily them coming to power, because they come to power just as the end time empire will come to power. I think he prevents Antichrist from coming to power until the ordained time. And then Daniel sits down for a short period of time, just as he's depicted in Daniel 12 at the midpoint, and then stands up. And that's the same time frame for the war in Revelation 12, midpoint of the last 7 years, where you have that war in heaven. And so you have these Antichrist wannabes that are coming down through these beast empires, and they have the daughters of Babylon religions. That's part of that whole hierarchy and infrastructure. So one would anticipate you're going to have that same type of relationship. We're going to have fallen angels walking amongst us, just as they did both before the flood and for a short time after the flood. It's not that they don't rule today, they're just not walking amongst us, and not all of them are in the pit prison. There's still the council of the gods that they rule from. And that we're going to see giants somehow, some way, whether it's survived giants in the earth, off the earth, in stasis somehow, or recreated giants, or descendants of giants, and the demonic spirits of giants that are going to have an oiketerion or a dwelling place for that spirit to interact within the world. So we're going to see giants somehow, some way, and we're going to see this ancient religion that's going to be dominating, again, that Antichrist will use to come to power on before he destroys Babylon in Revelation 17 at the midpoint of the last 7 years, and then introduces his own religion. So I think there's a direct parallel and lineage that if we want to try and imagine what's coming, and that what is coming is so horrific, it's really hard to understand what is coming. We get that image if we can take the time to understand what once was, that's going to be again in the end time. It'll be like the days of Noah, both before and after the flood, and you have all of these players active on both sides of the flood.
So, are you a flat earther? I had to ask.
Well, Rob and I had a lot of conversations on that. What I told him, and I'm still today, is I'm agnostic on it. So I could look at the passages from Greek and Hebrew, translate them either way. You know what? I only know one thing. I know Rob agreed on this, is something is going around something to create a lot of the effects. And so that's as far as I go. It was a passion of Rob to research, and he spent a lot of time on it and did some terrific research. That's not my mission, and it would take literally, to me, like a lifetime to really try and prove it. So I remain agnostic on it, and I know it's part of the end time deception, as part of many deceptions. So I try not to get too far down the path on either side, because I just don't have time to verify it. And I am a contrarian, so I like to verify everything that I sort of speak. So all I can do is, when I talk about flat Earth, is, well, I can do a little bit of backup this way or that way, but the rest is speculation because I've not verified it myself.
Fair enough.
Yeah, well put. So I think it's very interesting to talk about. You talked about Donald Trump. We talked about P.T. Barnum. Another figure that is coming up on the world stage very prevalently right now, and has some interesting parallels, I will say, with the ancient figure of Nimrod. In fact, there's an article that recently came out from the India Times that talks about how Elon Musk recently posted that his verified status goes all the way back to 3000 BCE. And of course, Elon being involved in not only space travel, reaching the heavens, but we also have Elon Musk and his involvement with speech and communication, with purchasing the X platform and what was once called Twitter. So some very interesting things and positions Elon Musk is being put in, and now he's put into a role with Donald Trump and his support of the election there. So what are your thoughts on Elon, and are there any connections bloodline-wise with Elon that you've heard of, or what are your thoughts in general with him as a political and public figure?
Well, certainly a genius. There's no doubt about that. Might be a trait of the genes, because typically they would rate themselves as superior and 135 plus on the IQ level. I've not done research on his bloodline, but it's interesting that as more comes out, I've heard that as well, as that, you know, his bloodline goes back over 3,000 years. I also heard, and I've not verified this yet, that his mother says that their bloodline goes back to angels. So that is talking the language of the elites, of the royales. And so it's a possibility, or maybe he's just wanting to ennoble those bloodlines and create offspring that's going to go forward to have a higher place, because he's sort of new. He's looked at as kind of new money today, but he's had a lot of doors open for him as well. So it suggests that there's some connection of help, but he's obviously trying to take on a white hat perspective versus the dark hat. And and again, we want to be really careful with these people that are in control, that they don't deceive us. So we want to really have good analytical skills. And one of the things that I noted that really stood out for me is that when he was talking about Google and their development of AI, he called it evil AI basically, and that his answer to that was to start his own AI company to create good AI. And I thought, that's probably not a coincidence. And so, and again, for me, AI is, we know the outcome. It doesn't matter whether it's good AI or evil AI, it's still going to have the same outcome, and it's got an extinction sort of capability that we all sort of know about. So we'll have to watch him to see where he goes. You know, he's from South Africa, but not seemingly from the English side, but more from the South African side. So more research needs to be done on him. So that would put him either back through the Dutch or the or English, but more likely through the Dutch side. So likely through the Middle Europa bloodlines. But there would be a lot of different psioning in the Dutch bloodlines. You know, like you have so much intermarriage even from them with the royals of Orange that were intermarrying into the English monarchship. So it would be complicated to probably go through. Certainly not considered part of the direct royales, but that noble elite, you know, is a fairly large circle of relatives that, you know, includes first cousins, second cousins, and however many cousins down the road. And again, they all like to keep some form of record to prove where they fit into the hierarchy. So short answer is I've not done enough research to make a decision for myself on him, but watching him very, very closely.
He says fantastic things. He's very pro large family. He's got, you know, a strong stance on conservative kind of views, such as the freedom of speech and just some of the ways he's presented himself online. He's definitely a meme lord. He knows how to stir the people in a similar way to Donald Trump. And his involvement and push of cryptocurrencies is also a large role that I think is very nominal and important to pay attention to, especially with his hand on the platform of Twitter and X, and then also his involvement in space travel and government contracts, and now his political allegiances through Trump. There's just so many strings that Elon Musk and SpaceX and X and whatnot are all holding, and so it's fascinating. Now, of course, we can't leave off without asking you to talk about a bloodline that I know is considered an elite bloodline. And in recent years, we've had King Charles step onto the stage with the passing of Queen Elizabeth. So maybe you could speak to him and his role. And I know even in their heraldry, you know, the red dragon that is ruling the monarchy now there in Britain. What is his role, and how do you see him filling this role in the coming years on the world stage? How does the British monarchy actually influence the UN and world elements?
Well, I'm not picking King Charles to be Antichrist, but I leave open the idea that his son might be. as one of the bloodlines. I think King Charles is getting up there a little bit in age, and there's a lot of things yet to be done. So, but it's the bloodline, and so he has an interesting bloodline that has not only Stuarts in there, but it's the Hanover bloodline that was originally that came across with King George, and they changed their name to Windsor in World War One. There's also the German Cossacks bloodline that's intermixed into that Hanover bloodline. What was interesting about Prince Charles is that when he was as Prince of Wales, he said that his genealogy went back to Vlad the Impaler, which Dracula is based on. Mm-hmm. Of course, Dracula means son of a dragon, and in Greek, Draconta means a watcher in Dracont, and that Vlad the Impaler was this classic noble Tuatha De Danann giant. He had red hair, hazel eyes, pale skin, and a bunch of attributes that fit sort of the Dracula character as they base it on him. And his bloodline goes back to the Scythians and a tribe named Agrathi that comes out of their Herculides bloodline. Hercules is the son of Elk-Beni after the flood, and Zeus is the celestial mafia godfather, and they call that the Cretazens, which is connected to the original Crete island, and Zeus has a lot of relationships with Crete in terms of how they come up with that gens as a factor, as a patriarchal gens versus a matriarchal gens, and the genes as we're talking about. So, and they keep these genealogies so they know where they fit in. So when he says he was a descendant of Vladimir or Vlad the Impaler, understand that they would have the genealogies to back that up. So do I think that that whole bloodline and dynastic claim of England has been positioning them since the time of King James? Absolutely, probably even before that. And so you have English that is created in that time. It's the Baconian English that's going to be used for the KJV Bible, and they're going to use that to make that a language of the world, part of the Babel sort of imagery. And the Commonwealth is how they're going to what they're going to create to create their empire. So I think there was dynastic claims there all along, but I would underline that all the royals have that same dynastic claim and that same ambition. It's kind of like that old Highlander series where there can only be one. They have to chop off each other's heads to eliminate other rivals. And that's the way it's going to be in the end time. And so it's important to understand who the different players are, but we don't know who's going to be the actual Antichrist, but he is definitely up there, and his bloodline up there with the main rivals, I think.
As always, Gary, just wanted to say thank you for walking us through some of these concepts. I know, in just a short interview, it's so hard to get into the deep nitty-gritty, historical references that you use for your books. Now, you previously published the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and you recently published the second edition of that. Could you tell us what you're covering in your new book and a little bit more about, for people to check out? What is it that you break into in your new novel?
So after I wrote book one, I actually started writing another book. I was really struggling to get that one done, and as I'm going through the process in the years, is people are contacting me on a regular basis, whether they're asking me questions on social media or through email. However, there's a commonality that comes out in that sort of communication, is that the Christians said, we really like your kind of research, and we really like that book one is kind of based on the Bible and how the Bible intersects with all of the globalist polytheist testimony. We'd like somebody who does your kind of research on polytheism to do a deeper dive on the Bible. And so I thought, well, I don't want to ever write a sequel to Genesis 6, and because I didn't want to be redundant. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized what they were telling me, and so I dropped what I was doing for book 2 and started this for book 2. And of course, that whole process taught me how to write the book I was struggling to write. So it's been a worthwhile venture on that. So book 1 is one of those unique books, and there's nothing out there on the market in terms of the topic area that it covers and the wholeness of it. And so it's kind of unique. And I think book 2 is unique, but in a different way. It's like book 1 on steroids for Christians. And if people are familiar with Dr. Heiser's work, I use a lot of the things I'm sort of talking about in reference in book 1, but I take it deep into the languages, and particularly the Hebrew and the Greek for book 2, and show, a larger meaning to a lot of the words. And so this book is designed for Christians. And one of the things that people said was book 1 really made the Old Testament come to life. Well, this will make the Old Testament come to life in ways that people haven't seen before. So I'm going to cover off for Christians, and it's targeted at Christians, for Christians, and it's going to talk more about things in the Old Testament that's talked about in any other book. So I'm going to give all the different, I'll give the angelic hierarchy. I've restructured it just a little bit from the standard, what the church fathers do, because I never could see archangels as being on the 3rd level when they're in the presence of God. So I'll give the hierarchy of the loyal and the rebellious angels. I'll talk about the hierarchy of the visible ones as well. I will distinguish the difference for people on demons and different terms that they need in section 1. But as I get into it, what I'm doing is I'm dealing with the different kinds of giants, whether it's the hybrid giants or it is the actual giants after the flood. I will take them back to specific patriarchs, and many of them back to a specific fallen angel, and show you how I do that on the research using different sort of methods. And then I'll provide all that information as context, where I walk through in section 3, or in section 4, make that section 5, all of the wars after the flood. I'll cover, yes, Genesis 14 in a different way than I do in book 1, but I'll cover all of the campaigns of the Exodus, whether or not it's the battle of Rephidim or Atharim that precede it, whether or not it is the Eastern campaign, the Central, the Northern, the Southern, the Mountain campaign, all the wars of the judges, all the way through to King Solomon, and identify how we know these nations are giants, and show you how you get there to identify them as the giants. And just give a complete dive into things that people haven't sort of considered, like with even in the time of David, where there's giants, we don't know how deep that goes. And there's a tribe that doesn't have a patriarch that goes back to the Table of Nations called the Geshurites, and these are actually giants, Geshurim, and the king of that area of that country at that time is Talmai. Yes, same name as one of the names of the 3 kings of Anak in Numbers 13 that are listed and elsewhere, patronymic title name. And he has a daughter named Maacah. And so David does a treaty with them, takes Maacah as his wife, produces Absalom. Maacah is a patronymic name for the Maacathim, also in the land of giants. And Talmai, the Geshurim, is a giant. And all of a sudden now you have a son, Absalom, who starts a civil war, who's trying to usurp the Davidic dynasty and replace it with a hybrid giant human dynasty to produce one would deduce a Antichrist dragon Messiah from that bloodline. So those are the types of things I'm going to bring into concept. So, and then I'm going to highlight all what I think are the important examples that are going to be used in prophetic allegory for the end time. And the last 2 sections is basically walking through prophecy and how it connects to the days of Noah, and that nothing is new under the sun. And I lay down my chronology and show you how the allegories that come out of the Old Testament are defined, and what it means for understanding biblical chronology. And I show people how I get to my chronology in the preface, so that whether people agree with me or not, they know how I got there. And then it's out there for people to say, how does that test what I feel about prehistory or prophecy? And so one of the things in my approach that I think is helpful for people that might be struggling on prophecy is that I put everything around what Jesus said, but in the chronology and the template that Jesus provides in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 17, and 21, and not put what Jesus said around the other prophets. Everything gets put around what Jesus said, even the book of Revelation. When you do that, all the contradictions start to disappear. So I have a generous excerpt of book 1 and book 2 on my website. I have a place to get a signed copy, and you can go to buy book 1 or book 2. I'm having a revision for the website done as we speak. And there will be a bundling page being added to it for discounts if you want to buy one of each. You can connect to Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and Amazon.ca to get the printed copy. I have icons up for the digital version. The Audible version came out on book 2 about 2 months ago. I'll have an icon up in that, and if things go right, in the next few days, book 2 will be released on Audible, and I'll have an icon up there with the website revision as well. And that's also the best way to get a hold of me, is through my website, through Contact the Author.
Awesome. Well, it's been an honor to have you on Skiba News Nation, and thank you so much for being on the show, and you're coming on soon, so that's great. I'll come up with some really good questions, I promise.
Well, there's really good questions today, so thank you for having me on the show, and hopefully we've raised a few eyebrows in the audience, and a few questions, and a few things that they're going to dig a little deeper into. One of the things that I like to remind people of is to, and I use this on the signing of my book, is be Berean-like in your approach to prehistory and prophecy.
Awesome.
And measure everything outside the book, if you do that kind of research, against what's inside the Bible, and that has to be your measuring stick.
You guys there at home, make sure to check out Gary's books. Gary's book has a special place in my heart. I met him back at the Exposing Darkness conference in 2016, and got a book that I gave to my wife-to-be back at the time, and we happened to be reading it at the same time. It was one of those things that we would discuss when we were first getting to know each other. So really dense reading material for a courtship process, but it turned out to be Gary's book. And so, Gary and I also have some fun interviews over the years. I think we did Wars of the Giants back in 2018, which has like millions of views by now. It's been a very successful interview, but yeah, guys, please check out Gary. We really appreciate his time, and yeah, love having you on, Gary. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
If you like what we do here on Skiba News Nation, please like and subscribe, and also share with others so we can grow the biggest truth-seeking community on the internet. Huge shout out to all of our Patreons out there. If you like bonus content, you want some extra Skiba News Nation stuff, please go to patreon.com/Skiba News Nation.
Son of the legendary Lost Jeremiah Skiba.
It's like they don't even want to wake up.